So I named this dough the Nutty Professor because I experimented with sesame oil and sesame seeds to come up with a dough that has a slight nutty flavor to it. So not technically nuts, but here we go with the ingredients. 600 grams of flour, 1.5 teaspoons of yeast, 500 ml of water, 2 tablespoons of sesame seeds, a tablespoon of sesame oil, and 1.5 teaspoons of salt. So I always start by weighing out my flour instead of by cups. So it's about 4.5 cups, but generally you want to invest in a kitchen scale and weigh out your baking ingredients. It is very useful and a lot more accurate. So we're going to start by measuring out 600 grams of all-purpose flour. And again, this has a nutty flavor, but there is no nuts. It is sesame seed and sesame oil. So it's a very subtle flavor, but it adds quite a bit to the flavor, underlying flavor of the dough. So I encourage you to give it a try. So we're going to add our flour to a mixing bowl, our yeast, our salt, and our sesame seeds. So pretty much your dry ingredients you want to mix first before adding any liquid ingredients. I don't use a stand mixer or any bread machine or anything. It's just all by hand. And I like to use generally the no knead method, so it sits and ferments and does its own work for you. A lot easier that way, and you get a lot more flavor. But I'll show you, there's two alternatives after we do this to during the first rise. So again, mix your dry ingredients to start with. You could always add an extra tablespoon of sesame seeds, but I found 2 tablespoons is pretty much enough. And we're going to add our 1 tablespoon of sesame oil. Now this is one of those flavored oils that you have to be careful with in terms of how much you want to add, because you just want a slight taste of it in the background on the dough. You don't want it overpowering. So I would experiment, and if you want to add a little bit more you can, but start with a tablespoon. If anything, you could add more sesame seeds instead of the oil. Okay, we're going to add our 2 cups or 500 milliliters of just regular water. And I start with a Danish dough whisk and just incorporate the dry and wet ingredients together. You could use a wooden spoon or a plastic spoon. And as you mix, it will become a little bit more work. So you're only going to mix this for, you're not really mixing, you're just kind of incorporating the ingredients together. So only for about less than a minute, because you're going to set it aside and it's going to do, all the yeast is going to do the work for you. So over the 8 to 10 hours if you choose that method, or 1 to 2 hours in a warm area like an oven with an oven light on. There's 2 options after this, but I'll show you that in a minute. But in any event, the yeast is going to do the work for you, so you don't have to do really a lot of mixing or kneading. It will do that for you. So I'm just bringing down the ingredients from the sides and getting everything in the middle, and then just kind of flattening it out. So it's a fairly wet dough, the hydration's fairly high. So you'll see later on that when we take it out, there's been a lot of activity and it's fairly hard to work with, but you just add a little bit of flour. But you end up with a nice hairy, fluffy dough. Okay, so we're going to cover that. We're going to place in a draft-free area of your house for 8 to 10 hours covered. Or the other option is to put in your oven with the light on for about 1 to 2 hours. The longer you let it sit, the more flavors develop, so I would encourage you to go for the longer time, but you can certainly, if you're in a rush, you can shorten the time and just put it in a warm area. So this is a non-stick mixture that I make out of oil, vegetable shortening, and flour. I'll include the link for that. So I just coat my pizza pans with that. This is just before we're going to put the dough on, so you don't have to do this right away, just when it's time to pretty much get the dough ready. Okay, so we're going to flour our work surface. I just use a bench scraper here to spread it out a bit. But yeah, you do need a bit of flour because it's a fairly sticky dough and it's a little bit difficult to work with at the beginning. So this was after about 8 hours. You can see there's been a lot of activity, signs of bubbles there. Okay, nice and jiggly. So we're going to take that out onto our work surface and we're going to kind of punch it down, take some of the air out and let it do a second rise. Now you can either do it a second rise in a separate bowl after you split this into two, because we're going to make 2 large pizzas. But lately what I've been doing is letting it rise right in the pizza pan, and it's been turning out really good, so I'll show you that in a minute. So we're just going to kind of fold it over with some of the flour. You can also flour your hands as well. The goal here is to get a little bit of the air out, so punch it down a bit. But then we're going to split this into 2 because we're going to make the 2 large pizzas. Okay, so just kind of fold it over a few times, work it a bit, get some of the air out, and start to form it into a large ball. You kind of cup your hands so you kind of go under the ball and squeeze at the same time. So just form it into a large ball. If you need to add more flour, you can do so. I'm just going to use my bench scraper. You can use a knife as well, but just try to cut it fairly evenly into 2 pieces. And then each one, again, you're just going to kind of cup your hands, work it into a ball. And by adding the sesame seeds and the oil, you're not really overpowered any other flavors of the pizza, all the toppings and everything. It's just kind of adds a little bit different flavor and nuttiness that's interesting. So, you know, if you're making regular dough all the time and you want to try something different, I encourage you to give this a shot. Okay, so we're going to add, we've divided them in 2, and we have our 2 pizza pans. I do grease a little roller here that I use, and I just initially kind of get it spread out. And you should oil your hands as well at some point, because you're going to see that I switch from a roller to my fingers, and I find it easier just to kind of work it and just kind of rotate the pan as I go. But if your hands start to stick, just add a bit of oil. And the oil I usually keep by my stovetop is sunflower oil, because it's a fairly neutral oil with not a lot of flavor. So that's kind of my go-to oil in a little bottle. Okay, so you just kind of want to spread it out. You don't necessarily have to go right to the edge, because you're going to do the second rise and then it will become more elastic and it'll be easier to spread. So you'll see in the next clip it's easier to spread to the edge and it's puffed up a bit. So you're just basically flattening it out, getting a nice flat consistent circular shape, and then we'll go from there. We're going to cover that with a towel, clean towel. And we're going to stick both of them in a warm area for 30 to 45 minutes, depending on how warm your oven is. We do have a proofing cycle feature on our oven, which is very useful. Basically, there's a heating element and a fan, but it kind of simulates having your oven light on. So just pick a warm area. Here you can see I'm just there's a bit of rising that's happened, so I'm just kind of pushing it down and spreading it out. But I like this method because it gives you a nice airy pizza dough at the end. But what I do is I dock it, so I poke a few holes with a fork to kind of reduce the amount of bubbles that will happen. With the heat during baking, sometimes you'll get bubbles. So it's important with this method, I think, to dock it. Okay, so this is some homemade tomato sauce. You can certainly use pizza sauce or whatever tomato sauce you want to use, or whatever toppings. This is just the toppings on this video are really just everyone has their favorites. So the one thing I would suggest is not to add too much sauce. If you over sauce your pizza, it will end up being a little bit too soggy. So go sparingly on your sauce if you can. And that being said, if your sauce is fairly watery, you could strain it off a little bit too before you add it. You want a sauce that doesn't have a lot of water content for pizza. Here I'm just adding shredded mozzarella. You could certainly have other types of cheeses, but like I said, the toppings are not that important in this video. It's more about what I added to the dough, so have that kind of nutty flavor to it. So I'm just going to kind of speed up the video and show you some of the toppings, but yeah. So this 600 grams of flour does give you 2 large to extra large pizzas. These are 15-inch pans. So the other pizza I did Hawaiian, so pineapple and other ingredients, but I won't show you that. And we're going to bake for 17 to 20 minutes at 450 Fahrenheit or 230 Celsius on the middle rack. So it's important that you don't go too low or too high. You want a fairly consistent heat. Everyone's oven is obviously different, but what I do is after 10 minutes I flip them and I put one on the upper rack and one on the lower rack. I just kind of flip their positions, but I do after 10 minutes I do that. So yeah, roughly 20 minutes is what I end up, this is 20 minutes worth of baking. So I also add a little bit of, I brush on a bit of sunflower oil on the crust just to give that little crispiness on the edge. So that's an option as well. So there's the results. If you want it a little bit crispier crust, you could add another few minutes, but I wouldn't go too much longer. And there you go. But it's a nice change from your just regular plain dough. Has a bit of, like I said, a bit of nuttiness, and you could add more sesame seeds or even roast them if you want, just to add that little bit of flavor. I always like to try something different. So thanks for watching, everyone. Stay tuned for more videos. Please subscribe, and bye for now.